r/AskReddit by Reddify. Serious teachers of Reddit. What red flags have you seen in your students? What happened? Once had a parent find out that I'm gay, and b, I have some music industry contacts. They immediately offered me unlimited, unsupervised access to their 16-year-old son in exchange for helping him break into the music business. I was 35. I reported them immediately. Holy it. That's awful. What kind of parent does that? Let alone think that? Did the kid know what was going on? The kid knew. And apologized to me. Apparently this offer had been made to a couple other people, and never taken advantage of. I really hope that part is true. I would have helped him anyway. He was one of my favorite students. But after that I didn't feel comfortable around any member of the family ever again. Wow. The fact that they didn't just ask first is horrifying. Hey. Just straight bar kid was literally the first thing they had to offer. Before they even checked what you would ask. Not to mention how ducked up their ideas of what gay people must be like are. I had a student ask me if I had any old glasses frames she could have, because hers broke. I knew she was in the foster care system, so I asked her why her foster mom couldn't get her some new ones. She told me that her foster mom said she could only get new frames every 4 years, which made her sad because her real daughter had just gotten a second set of frames that year. I had noticed several other things. The student asked me if I had any extra female hygiene supplies so she could have some at night. So I sent her to the nurse to get extras that seemed like they should have been covered by the state. I reported this, and it turned out that the foster mom was clearly not providing basic necessities for either of her foster kids. I was really glad I went with my gut. Edit. And yes, I found some glasses frames for her. Double edit. Wow. Thank you for the gold. I was not expecting that. You all have been so kind. I'm sure most people would have done what I did. I just happened to have a connection with a student, so she felt comfortable letting me in a little bit. The CPS worker is the hero in this story. Why would someone take in foster kids if they are not going to provide them with basic needs and care? That is so sad. They do this so they can receive a state check. Edit. Source: I'm a teacher who has had foster care students. Sadly true. There is a lot of abuse of the foster care system in my state. Plenty of people take a kid in and spend as little as they can on them and pocket the rest. Had a kid I taught in preschool who would get unreasonably angry, violent, and loud for no obvious reason. Everything would be fine, and then he would totally snap. All we could do when he did was to usher other kids away and wait for him to calm down. His mom seemed nice enough when I met her, and his dad didn't appear to be in the picture. He never showed up, was never discussed by mom or child, etc. One day, mom didn't show to pick him up. I was the only teacher left, since he was the last kid, and he just sat at the window, sobbing. She didn't show up until 7 p.m. that night and our building closed at 5:30 p.m. By that time, he was completely inconsolable, and it was all I could do run down to the kitchen with him, make him a sandwich with the director's permission, and let him watch movies on my phone. Over the course of the next few weeks, this started to happen more, and no matter how many times the director talked to his mom, she would continue to come late. Then his lunches started to deteriorate, and he would come to school hungry, having not been fed breakfast. He was only with us for the 3 months between preschool and kindergarten, and I have no idea what happened to him. But the director was paying close attention, and, luckily, we never saw any physical abuse. I always brought him breakfast and made sure I had an extra sandwich and capricin for him when I came to work. That kid didn't go hungry on my watch. Poor kid was just being forgotten. Oh god, my parents used to forget which one was supposed to pick me up. I went home with my teacher a couple times. I can't imagine what my teachers thought of my parents doing that. This happened all the time when I was in after school. My mom would have to stay late at work and there were no cell phones at the time, so I'd go home after like 3 hours with the after school lady. Eventually my mom worked out a deal to if she ever stayed late at work, we'd go home with the after school lady and she would babysit us, and my mom would pay her. She's now my mom's best friend and we see her all the time, and spend a lot of holidays together. That's pretty much how it worked for me. My mum sometimes had to take off on a trip and would end up not being able to pick me up. So I would go home with my teacher until either my dad could pick me up that night, or just stay the night with my teacher and go back to school. It sounds so strange now, but it was a very small, very liberal school with loose boundaries. I had a kid my first or second year, so this was 1995-96, who was pretty scary. I teach English. BTW. He was just an asshole, had an excuse for everything. Tried to bully other kids. When we had discussions about literature, he wanted to derail the conversation into weird territory. Hard to explain. But the kid was just off. At parent conference time, mom came in. And I was careful to say some positive things. Him derailing conversations because creativity. For example, mom cried and told me no one had ever said anything positive about her kid before me. She even wrote me a thank you note. I also covered the aspects of his behavior that concerned me, of course. Anyway, after high school he got arrested for theft, drugs, and assault and spent some time in jail. He committed suicide before he was 30. Edit. I didn't mean for the ending to be so abrupt. I had him in 10th grade. Totally forgot about him. And then a few years later I heard he was in jail. And then a few years after that heard he had committed suicide. He's not the only disturbed kid I've had, but because it was my first year, I remember him. We had a severely autistic child at our preschool, and he was eventually forced to leave as he needed teachers with more extensive training and smaller class sizes. We all loved him, but the school just was not right for him. I could tell as he was getting older, but not progressing developmentally at all, that his parents were a wreck. They were devastated every time they had to come get him because he'd lost his temper and thrown a chair at a friend. I could see his dad had been crying. So from then on, I made it my mission to pay super close attention to Paul, and damn it, I would find one great thing he did that day, even if it was handing me back my pen. All of his autism issues were legally required to be documented in writing. So I decided our verbal in-person communication would only be positive. Paul shared his crayons today. Paul got to hold the pointer today, on his last day before he left. His father thanked me for doing as much as I could to make Paul's transition less negative all the time. It allowed him to have days where he really felt like a normal 3-year-old who just had a fun day at school. It meant the world to me. I ducking loved that kid. Update edit. Thanks, everyone. I wanted to make sure they didn't need to stress anymore on normal pickup days. If it's 4 PM and you haven't heard from us, it will continue to be good news. Side story, we had another kid with a lot of behavioral issues. He was just really physical with other kids and always hitting, kicking, biting, except when he played with the equally unpredictable and violent Paul. But you put the two of them together, and they played calmly, spoke to each other, shared, used manners. They were like normal boys, but only with each other. As a boy with autism, I'm going to tell you that you're an absolute flipping hero. Thank you so much for showing compassion to your fellow man. I've never heard of flipping before, but I'm gonna put it to good use from now on. Cheers, heartless key. I work at a gymnastics place. I work with a group of 2nd/3rd grade girls. At the beginning of the year, it was fine. She was really happy, cheerful, got along with everyone. Then one day, she didn't come. Didn't think too much of it. Kids are absent a lot. I hardly ever have a full class. But one day turned to 2. Then 3. Eventually, a week went by when she finally showed up. At least physically. She looked emotionally drained. Like she couldn't walk 5 feet without giving up. She didn't want to be there. So I told her she should call her folks at home to see if they can come get her. Big mistake. She went off, saying how I didn't want her there, and that she thought that I thought it was the best week since I wasn't here. Then she went to the bathroom. I couldn't go in there. I'm a guy. So the female teacher went into being her out. We went into a back room and asked her if she was okay, to which she started crying. She told me that at the beginning of the year, she was living with her grandparents, hence why she was happy all the time. Then they suddenly died in a car crash while she was at gymnastics. I was horrified. But that's not the end. She said the reason she was living with them was because her parents would abuse her and force her to do it. She didn't want to, so they would beat her. Now, I've seen things that should make me cry. My grandmother and grandfather have both passed, on both sides. One of my close friends died to cancer when I was in middle school. It was tough. But the story she told me, it ranks right up there with it. I was about to cry myself. No child should have to endure this type of thing. So the grandfather took her away and brought her out of that life. Until they left. It was sickening. After about 45 minutes of talking about it, I convinced her we call the police. She was sent to counseling. I never heard from her again. I never heard of what happened to her or the parents. Granted, this happened 2 months ago. I'm hoping one day she'll walk in and I'll see her. Happy as she was when I first met her. Edit. So a lot of people have asked me to edit or apply / when she comes back. I'll be sure to do that. Hopes are high. That's rough, man. Hope she got the help she deserves. Man. I hope so too. It's rough seeing how emotionally destroyed someone can be, especially a child. A bit different from some of the others, but I once taught a class of 30 at-risk 4th graders. They were getting supplementary math lessons, as they were failing their regular math class, and it was rough. It was one of those schools where they have metal detectors at every entrance. On multiple occasions I broke up rather impressive fights, without conventional weapons. They were really ingenious. One kid once ripped out the 3-ring part of the 3-ring binders and attacked another student's forearm with it. Really creative, but obviously not great behavior. I was an untrained and unqualified teacher. I was supposed to be designing after-school program curriculum, not teaching. I actually completely missed the red flag. One kid, I'll call him Darren, was really well behaved. I never had to say anything to get him to sit down, stop hitting other students, stop throwing things, or any of a number of disruptive activities going on in the classroom. In fact, he never did much at all. He spent most of the time dozing off or barely listening, leaning forward and resting his head in his hands. I didn't think anything of it, as the rest of the class was so much for disruptive and destructive. I was spending most of my time and energy just keeping them under control. Well, Darren was quiet and sleepy during class because his house burned down at the start of the school year. The fire killed his grandma, who raised him, and his dog. He was sent to live with his cousins. 12 people who lived in a very small house with nowhere close to enough bedrooms to be legally occupied the way it was. Darren had been depressed and having problems sleeping, sharing a room with his cousins for the entire year by the time I found out what happened. I learned on the last day of school. I'm sorry I didn't know. Darren, I'm sorry I didn't notice you were having problems. That's awful. I hope he's doing okay now. I hope they all are. I was not the right person to teach them, and they broke my heart every day. Speaking as someone who has been on the side of having a damaging family/home life, I went through all of middle school and most of high school and no one had a clue. When you spend your whole life giving everything you've got to not let someone see what's really going on, you get scarily good at it. This was how he had to live his life to survive, and it's absolutely not your fault for not noticing something that he wanted you not to see. I sincerely hope you're both doing alright now. Keep being a good teacher. Sometimes that's the best thing you can possibly do. Make sure to like and subscribe so we can watch together.